Hello there and welcome back to Building with the Boys. We now have issue 6 of Hachette's Build the Titanic. There's a lot to do, but not a lot to do in this one. You'll see what I mean when we get to it. We are building more of the stern. We're building the upper part of the bag, attaching that. And we are doing more with the engine that we built in part 3. So we're going to bring that up, including the parts that we built in part 5. And we'll be adding that to the engine. I'm going to quick look through the magazine. There is a picture in there of this monument, which I can tell you is in Southampton. The reason why I can tell you that is those who've been watching from the beginning might have remembered me mentioning 2 personal Titanic stories. One that I don't come out of it looking particularly well, which I told you I'd tell you when we get to issue 50. It involves that statue. It involves that monument. That's all I'm saying. At the end of this one, we are going to have a chat, which I was going to do last issue, about an actress that was on board the Titanic that was in a Titanic movie no one has seen. But we'll have a talk about that. She actually featured in the magazine that came in part 5. Now, they tell you something about her that's kind of true, but not really. But we'll talk about it at the end. We're going to get into the parts first and take a look what this looks like. So, again, I'm hoping this stays. I'm hoping this is how they're going to package things from now on, because it's just better for our world. It really is, than all that single-use plastic they give us. These are the parts that we get in number 5. Let's take a look. Okay, so we've got engine parts. We're all familiar with those from the last issue. Some screws. What else do we have here? Aha. We have this very large piece of the hull. This is part of the starboard bag. Now, we can see on this one, the Titanic plate, unlike the other side, is already on this one. So if you were modifying this, you may have a problem. Which is why I always advise, wait until the end before you start modifying stuff. But I'm sure you'll find a workaround. But that's what we've got for this one. We will be putting together the engine first, and then we'll be coming back to the stern. Okay, quickly correct myself. I just referred to it as the stern. It's not the stern. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm obsessed with calling it the stern. It really isn't the stern. So we're doing the same as what we did at the end of pack 5. We are attaching these two here. So we know how we're doing that. We take these 2 connector pieces there, and then we take these pieces exactly as we did in part 5. It's just a repeat. We're just doing the other 2. And again, I've got this whole thing where they don't go on smooth. This one here, I mean, it's reassuring because it means they're going to come off, but they don't go on easy. Right, I'm going to do these off camera, and then we'll take a look at it at the end. Okay, so we have our arm complete. Now you need to make sure all of your open mouths are facing upwards. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in the engine from part 3. Now, the important part here is you will see that you have these large open holes on one side, and you don't have them on the other. That's key, that's important, because when we're assembling this thing, what we want to do is lie it down so your holes are facing upwards. You're going to take this bar, and all of these open mouths are going to thread in from below. So we're going to attach each of these to its corresponding socket. Now, there's only one way it can go. You will see this when you do this. You can see exactly where they go. It all lines up, so you can see exactly where they link onto. So we're going to be linking onto here. Just rotate this so you can see it. Linking onto all these ones here that don't have a connecting arm on. And that's exactly where it's going to go. So we're going to connect that now, then we'll take a look at it. So here we are. Here's what this will look like when you have that done. So you can see that's hanging from there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bring this section up. And these pins here are going to go into these holes here. They say. Oh no, they're lining up quite nicely. Okay, so we just need to straighten that out. There we go. Okay, do this on an angle. Right. I see. Okay. Right. Pause. Let's have a look. Okay, so this is it complete. So this bar here just fits in quite nicely there. Now this is snug now, I will tell you that. Now this can only go anti-clockwise. They tell you do not turn it clockwise, go anti-clockwise. So from this way you can see it's a lot tighter than it used to be, but all of these arms move as they should, and the engine really is coming on quite nicely. And you can see they all move at different speed and they move independently from one another. And yeah, very nice it is too. So that's that part done. Now all we have to do is attach these two pieces of the bow together, and that will complete this month. So I've already put one screw in here, and this is, I'm just going to tighten these up. It really is just two screws. That's all we're doing here. So we're putting one screw in here, and then the other one down here, which I'll put in loosely. I'm just going to tighten up now. So that's all you've got to do. I mean, there's not really, there we go. There really isn't much to do with this one because there's no braces in this one. Just tighten that one. There's no braces at all go into this one. We do have these markings. I am curious what these are going to be because there are 1s, 2s. There appears to be a 9 over here. I'm curious what those are going to relate to. They're going to relate to something though, I would imagine. But that's what our finished part of the starboard bow looks like. And you can see there is the Titanic badge already in place on this one. Now I'm going to clip these together in a very crude way to give you an idea of what this looks like, but really rather lovely it looks too. But that is all you have to do in this stage, just these two screws here, and that's it. Here we are. That is what it will look like inside, and this is how we are looking outside. So that's what we've got going on. I'm afraid I can't do this without holding it, but I can show you from the bottom. There we go. So this is where we are, how we are looking. Now, I know that in part 7 we have what's called catwalk pieces, which I believe are going to come across here and here. Now, this will start to pull together. So those of you that are concerned about your joint, oh, I can see my joint too badly. Not really. I mean, again, if I catch the angle on it right, you can see it bad, but no. I mean, again, these things will start to pull together as we start bolting these together, and it's held together by the spaces. But really rather lovely that is looking. You know what? I'm going to go the whole hog. I'm going to try and get the forecastle on there as well. Appreciate this is as crude gets, and the forecastle isn't going to sit there. But this is what I can put together for you to give you an idea of where we are. And really rather lovely it is too. So there you have it. That is pack 6, and here we have what I'm talking about. Now, obviously this will all be bolted together, but you get an idea of what it is that we're dealing with, and it will look lovely. Now, in part 7, we have some parts listed as, I'll tell you exactly what they are. A catwalk, frame, support, and fixing screws. And for those of you who would like to see those, that's where they are there. So I would imagine, you know, I can't be sure, but I would imagine what we're doing is attaching those two parts together. Would make sense. And that's it for part number 6. Now, the one thing I did want to talk to you about again is the myths and the legends of the Titanic, and one of them was a film called Saved from the Titanic, starring Dorothy Gibson. Now, I know what you're thinking, never heard of it. Well, you wouldn't have, because every copy of Saved from the Titanic is lost. There are no copies of it exist. There are some still pictures of it, and there are pictures of Dorothy Gibson, and there are images of Dorothy Gibson out there. You can see her work. Listen to the story and then make your own mind up if you want to see her work. Dorothy Gibson was on board the Titanic, and she was a singer and an actress and a dancer. She was born in 1889 in Hoboken, New Jersey, and she was in vaudeville. That's what she did before films were a thing. I mean, this is how far back we're going. Movies weren't, you know, a big deal yet. I mean, the technology was there, but nobody really capitalized on it. But when they did, and they started making the first silent movies, they started looking for stars. And Dorothy Gibson is a very early example of one of the earliest examples of a crossover media star, because before she was in movies, she was a model for advertising. So if you've ever seen the old advertising from around about the era, it's similar to the White Star Line poster. There were images of girls. Now, those weren't coming from the heads of an artist. They had models. So the models would pose, and that's what Dorothy Gibson was, and she was a very popular one. So somebody in their wisdom thought, you know, who would be good for our movie? The advertising girl, and they put her in. And she did some bit parts, and these are silent movies, very different to what we get now. A lot shorter, so the average silent movie was about anything from 20 to maybe 40 minutes long, was the entire movie. Because again, if this was back when filming it, you were cranking the handle, and also in some places to project it, you were cranking a handle. So they were much shorter films. And Eclair Studios was kind of the big deal of the time, and they put out quite a lot of movies. And she was starring as a bit player in their movies until they sort of twigged that that's the advertising girl, we can capitalise on this, and they hired her as a full-time contracted star in July of 1911, so only a year before the Titanic. She was regarded as kind of she was a big deal. She was like the first major movie star, because there were no movie stars at that point, and she was the first sort of known movie star actress, Dorothy Gibson. So she had a talent for comedy. This was the one big thing I'd also say, that her comedic performance is very good, and in an era where there's no sound, sort of vocal is not going to save you. So the facial performances and reactions she was very good for comedy. However, that wasn't what really made her. What made her was a dramatic role. And it was her first starring role, and it was in a movie called Hands Across the Sea. How's that for ominous? It was her first lead, and it was her biggest deal until she starred in a movie called Saved from the Titanic. Now, what's remarkable about Saved by the Titanic is it was saved from the Titanic. What's remarkable about it is that it was written, filmed, released within 4 weeks of the Titanic sinking. That's how fast they got this movie out to capitalise on the kind of media frenzy of the sinking of the Titanic. And she was in it. But she was on board the Titanic. She was a survivor of the Titanic. And then 4 weeks later, she's making a movie about the Titanic. She just spent 6 weeks in Italy. So she's capitalising on her kind of new stardom and the money that it's given her to go and spend some time with her mother in Italy. Spent 6 weeks there. And then when it was time to go back to New York and make more movies, she joined the Titanic at Paris. And she was literally the first off the boat. From when the Titanic hit the iceberg, she was playing bridge in the lounge with some of the other ladies, and she was on Lifeboat 7. Lifeboat 7 was the first one off. So, as much as the movie, from the reports of it, is all about the harrowing events that happened to her, the reality of it is as Escapes in the Titanic goes, hers was probably the best that you could possibly have. It's hit, ladies get on the boat and off, and she was the first one away. So she wouldn't have seen a lot of the horrors that sort of developed over that evening. She was off and away and heading towards the Carpathia at that point, whilst the rest of the bedlam was happening. She was also in a criminally undermanned lifeboat. So again, her escape would have been quite pleasant in the scheme of things compared to everybody else's. So once on board the Carpathia, word gets back to her husband that she's okay. When the media frenzy hits, hubby has a brainwave, we can make money on this, I've got an actress. So he persuades her to star in it, and she co-wrote it. So she writes her own scene, and this was a big deal. Not only is this movie about the sinking of the Titanic, it stars somebody that was there. So it's almost like it's a real document of what happened, even though it really wasn't by all accounts. She's actually wearing, in the movie, she wears the exact same clothes in the movie that she was wearing the night she was on Titanic. And I've got a picture of her in the clothes on the Titanic. This is one of the only stills of the movie that exists. So take a look at this, and it gives you an idea of kind of the fashion of the time, and also who Dorothy Gibson was. So that's her. So she stars in Saved from the Titanic. It's a massive hit with audiences, huge hit with audiences. It isn't, however, a hit with critics, who say what I think a lot of us would be thinking now. Now, attitudes were slightly different back then, but there's something very morbid about making that film 4 weeks after that boat sank, when a lot of people were grieving. Now here it is for entertainment. It wasn't in the best of taste. Now, the main narrative of this story, when you hear people talking about her, is that this was her last film. It wasn't. There was one or two after this, but she did retire that year. This is how quick they turned those out. She actually retired in May of 1912 and pursued a singing career. Now, you will hear the narrative. This is where the narrative goes slightly askew, because what you will hear is people say that she was suffering from PTSD and never acted again, sank into depression, never acted again, sadly died a few years later. That ain't what happened. Okay, that's a nonsense. And I don't fully understand why she's being afforded this kind of grace. Because the more you learn about Dorothy Gibson, the more you learn she wasn't that nice a person. So please reserve your sympathy for the poor Dorothy Gibson saved from the Titanic until you hear the rest of the story. In 1913, so that's a year after, she killed a guy. She was driving too fast in a sports car that she probably shouldn't have been driving, and killed a guy. Ran him over and killed him, pedestrian. She didn't do a day in jail, because this is back in an era, which we're kind of still in, where celebrities don't go to jail. And if you're thinking that's unlikely, it's not. I mean, if you go and Google Matthew Broderick Ireland, you'll see something similar. Matthew Broderick killed 2 people in Ireland, driving too fast on the wrong side of the road. He was fined £100 for it, and that happened in like 1987. So yeah, it's not that hard to believe that Dorothy Gibson didn't do a single bloody day in prison over this, but she killed a guy. Now, what's interesting about it is in the courts, when they were assessing what happened, it was revealed that the car was owned by a gentleman called Brulator, who was actually her agent, her married agent, which pretty much exposed their affair. Now, they claim it wasn't an affair because he was separated from his wife at the time, but this was kind of a public shaming, and it meant that the separation had to become a full divorce. It was very embarrassing for all parties involved. So she thought, my career's done here, because I'm seen as this scarlet woman, this murderer. I'm out of here. So she headed to Paris, where she was going to spend the rest of her days. But not before she married Brulator, because they had to legitimise it. That didn't work out. That was annulled, so I don't know what happens to the marriage. No one's really sure, but there was a court case where they went, this isn't a legal marriage. So technically she was married to him, but wasn't, because the courts just went, this is a nonsense. So off she went, and she couldn't take the shame, went to live in Paris. And Paris is where she stayed until World War II broke out. When World War II broke out, she moved to Italy. Like, I don't want to be in France during World War II, which is understandable. So she spent World War II in Italy. This is where it gets weird. Because it wasn't like she was just hanging out in Italy. She became a force's sweetheart. Unfortunately, that force was the Third Reich. And she was a known Nazi sympathiser. And allegedly an intelligence operative for the Nazis. Now, there's dispute over this, and we'll get to why there's dispute over it. But by all accounts, Dorothy Gibson went on to become an intelligence operative for the Nazi Party and was a Nazi sympathiser. Wow. It's unbelievable, this story. It gets weirder. So this isn't just rumour and speculation. She made a declaration in 1944. This is years after these accusations have been put to her. But in 1944, she makes a public declaration that she has no longer has anything to do with the Nazi Party. So she definitely had something to do with them, but she said, I no longer have anything to do with the Nazi Party. Gets weirder. She's arrested shortly after this and jailed in Milan as an anti-fascist agitator. This is nuts, but it's true. So she ends up in prison in Milan, and she stated that it was worse than hell. It was an absolutely hellish existence, which it would be. It was a prison camp. She escapes from prison, but not on her own, because, I mean, this is an actress, for Christ's sake. It's not like she needed help, and she got help, and she got help from, this is insane, a resistance group called the Flamma Verde. Now, this is where the grey area of whether or not she was or wasn't a Nazi sympathiser comes from, because she claims that she told them she was a Nazi sympathiser and an intelligence operative, so they would help her escape. And help her they did. They helped her escape. And she crossed the border into Switzerland. On arriving in Switzerland, she was interrogated by the US Army. And they could neither confirm nor deny she was or wasn't a Nazi. They couldn't. So there wasn't enough there to say, right, we'll send you to Germany, you're their problem. But there also was enough that there was some grey area here. With regards to her being an intelligence operative, This is quite funny, but the actual statement was, she's too stupid to possibly be an intelligence operative. So who knows? I mean, maybe it was just all a masterclass in acting. So there's the grey area of was she or wasn't she? However, she died in 1946 in her apartment in France. Her mother lived for a further 15 years. Her mother lived until 1961, and her mother, who she had been spending the time with in Italy, was incredibly vocal about her hatred for the Allied forces and her support for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. So, was she tarred by her mother's brush? Or is it just clear there's no smoke without fire, and the both of them shared these opinions? That part doesn't come up. All you ever hear is this poor actress that suffered from PTSD. Now, her actions after 1912 don't sound like someone suffering from PTSD to me. It sounds like somebody that capitalised on a fairly horrible event, then went and lived a fairly sketchy existence during World War II, World War I and World War II. But that's what happened. She was too stupid to be a spy. And that is the story of Dorothy Gibson, who was the first film star and the star of the first film based on the Titanic. However, she was not the only actress on board. There was another actress on board that at the time wasn't known as an actress, but in the last few years of her life, that was what she was. And her name was commonly known as the unsinkable Molly Brown. Now, I can tell you something else about the unsinkable Molly Brown. Much like our other Titanic myths and legends, nobody ever called the unsinkable Molly Brown the unsinkable Molly Brown. That in itself, the name itself, is a myth. And that is something we will talk about when we get to pack. Next month, when we get to pack up part number 7 and 8, which is going to be good, because when we get to parts 7 and 8, that's it for our one a fortnight. We start getting 4 a month. So next month is the last time we only get 2 packs, and then we're going up to the 4, and this thing's going to start to come together lovely. If you've enjoyed that, if you've enjoyed the build, if you've enjoyed the little history lesson, give us a like, give us a subscribe. It helps the channel massively. Thank you for all your support so far. We tried to answer any comments you have down below. If you've got something that's a little bit too much for a comment section, you can email us at buildingwiththeboys@outlook.com. That's it for this month. In a world where you can be anything at all, just be nice, and we'll see you next time.